Welcome to this John F. Wood Center Makerspace independent learning tutorial. In this video, we will be taking an introductory look at Inkscape, an open source vector-based software. It's a great software for building files suited to our diverse menu of creative technology. Inkscape is a software with lots of tools and applications. In this video, we'll be talking about the most applicable tools for use in file creation for the Makerspace. We will be discussing what exactly a vector is, the shape tool, the text tool, the node tool, fill and stroke, grouping, union, difference, and intersection, and other path tools, online resources, the trace tool, and exporting your file. We're going to start this tutorial by opening up Inkscape, which you can recognize by the little black mountain icon. If you don't see it on the desktop or in the dock, you can find it by opening up the Applications or Launchpad menu and typing Inkscape. When we first launch Inkscape, it will show us this menu where it presents us with our most recently worked on files. But we can also start a new, fresh document where we can work on a blank canvas. In this case, we will start with a new document. When we open up our fresh file, you'll see that Inkscape shows us a default workspace, which kind of looks to me like a piece of paper. You do not need to contain your work on this sheet, as when we export the design, Inkscape will save the entirety of your project, whether it falls on the page guide or not. Before we begin, let's discuss what a vector is and what its uses are. Most people are familiar with the JPEG and PNG formats, which most images are formatted in. These formats hold information on each pixel within the design and can result in a blurry image when the scale is increased. A pixel-based format is ideal for some applications, but a vector-based format is the language that our equipment understands in order to perform a function based on the design. For example, cut, engrave, or embroider. Vectors are also ideal for the creation of logos and web-based elements, as they can be scaled up to any size without blurring or losing detail. I imagine a vector to be a little bit like a connect the dots. It creates and keeps track of individual points or nodes that exist in the design and what the line looks like between each of them. It does this by using algebraic functions. For example, you can see the individual points that make up the letter W in this logo. You can see how we can modify the lines in between these points by dragging it or altering the nodes. You'll notice that if we zoom into this logo, it will never ever get blurry. That's because this design is saved as a function rather than a collection of pixels. Vectors are critical to understand for the file design of most of the equipment in the Makerspace. Notably, the Xtool laser, Cricut, and digital embroidery machines rely on this format heavily. In this video, we will be introducing you to the main tools in Inkscape and showing you how to create basic custom vector files. Inkscape has a lot of different tools to use here, but don't be intimidated by the sheer number of buttons that you see. We mainly use the same 4 or 5 tools over and over again as needed to create a huge variety of custom files. On the left of the screen, you'll see a working toolbar where you'll find all of your different tools. You can switch back and forth either by learning the macro keys for each tool or just by selecting them from the bar. You will quickly become very familiar with the very first tool in the bar, the selection tool, for moving shapes around, rotating them, and resizing them. Depending on which tool you have selected, you will see that the top toolbar will change to show the options for that specific tool. Looking down the toolbar, we can see the main shape tools: rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and text. The rectangle tool, as expected, will give you a rectangle. If you hold Control on the keyboard while you drag and draw your rectangle, it will give you a perfect square. Once the shape is created, you will see that these corners are home to these little white squares, which are for resizing. You can also see that on one corner there are these tiny circles as well. By dragging these circles, you can modify the rectangle to have rounded corners. The change will be applied evenly to all the corners of the rectangle. Next, we will take a look at the ellipse tool, which is for creating circles and ovals. Again, if you hold Control as you drag and draw your ellipse, it will result in a mathematically perfect circle instead of a bendy oval. The square nodes are again for resizing, but the circular one can be used to create a fraction of that ellipse. This can be very helpful for creating arcs and semicircles. Some of the more complex shapes include the star and polygon tool. This tool will create a polygon based on the number of sides that we request. It can also decide whether the polygon will be outwardly faceted or inwardly faceted. Now that we have talked briefly about some of the different shapes, we're going to talk about order. In this case, you can see our red shape and our yellow shape are on top of this brown shape. We can control which shapes are in the front and which are behind by going up here to the top toolbar and using these ordering buttons. You can change the order one level at a time, or you can bring an object entirely to the front or entirely to the back of the composition. This will have plenty of applications when we are using the different shapes as positive and negative space, playing around with their relationships to each other and using different path tools. The final shape tool I'm going to mention is the text tool. It can be found about halfway down the working toolbar. This text tool will allow you to add custom text to the design. Once we formulate some text, we can go up here to the tool menu and change to different fonts, styles, and sizes. We can also open the Text and Font tab by going to the Inkscape toolbar and selecting Text, Text and Font. This is the quickest way to compare lots of fonts. It will show you a list of all the different fonts that are available and a preview of your selected text just below it. You can click on the individual fonts, or you can use your arrow keys to scroll through them and preview them quickly. When you find a font that works best, you can press Apply at the bottom of the tab to apply the chosen settings to the text box. Initially, the text created in the text tool is treated much like a typical shape, but it has extra properties, allowing you to go back and change what the text box says and how it appears. Before we move on, I want to mention some helpful tools that you can use to transform these shapes. You can use these two buttons here to mirror the shape on the horizontal and on the vertical axis. You can also rotate the shape by 90 degrees by using one of these two buttons, depending on whether you prefer to rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. And you can manually change the exact sizing of a shape by changing the width and height here in the bar. Keeping this little lock turned on is going to keep the aspect ratio the same when you resize it and stop it from bending out of shape. So if you change the height, the width is going to scale accordingly. You can also change your units here. I find this very helpful if I'm trying to make something that I'll be printing out. For the Xtool laser, Cricut, and embroidery machines, we can always resize our design later in those proprietary softwares. Another thing is, right now, this text and these objects are being treated as shapes. When an object is a shape, we can only edit it in defined ways, and it ultimately still remains in some form that shape. What we can do instead is change these shapes into paths. Once a shape is a path, we can edit it in innumerable ways. To convert a shape into a path, we will go up to the Inkscape toolbar and select Path, Object to Path. Object to Path will turn this shape into a connect the dots that we can modify to our heart's content. Once we do the same to our circle here, you can see that we can play around with this all that we like. This step is also critically important when dealing with text. When the object is in a text box form, it can be edited, but our different pieces of equipment won't be able to see the text. It will import the design without the text element unless it's converted to a path first. If we convert the text to a path, you'll see that we can now no longer edit what it says. It has become an object rather than an editable text box. So far in this tutorial, as we've been moving things around and resizing them, we've been using the selection tool, which sits right at the top of your toolbar. You can also use this tool to rotate shapes. If you click on your selected shape, you can see that the arrows in the corner, which are used for resizing, will change to these curved arrows, which you can click and drag to rotate your object. The second tool down in the toolbar, the one below the selection tool, is called the node tool. The node tool will instead show us the points that make up a vector, the dots that make up our connect the dots. The node tool will allow us to mess around with these little nodes and the lines in between them. We can grab and drag these nodes or the lines adjacent to them. You can also manipulate the handles aside either side of a node to articulate the line passing through it a little more carefully. If you select a point and you find it has no handles associated with it, you can add handles to it by selecting Make Selected Nodes Symmetric from the top menu bar. If the node tool is selected and you click on an image and don't see these points, that means that your image is not converted into a vector yet. If I grab one of these handles, you can see that the further out I push it, the more gradual the line is going to arch and the wider out that it swings. The closer I bring it into the point as I twist it around, you can see that the curve becomes more tight and acute. You can select and deselect from different objects within the design to see the nodes of each one. If we see a straight edge or sharp corner that we want to create a more softer and gradual look for, we can select the node and again click Make Selected Node Symmetric from the top toolbar. The handles will emerge and create a more natural curve for us. If we want to make it a little more gradual or a little more steep, we can push or pull the handles in and out. You'll notice here that due to the properties of the path, where it crosses over itself, the fill is going to jump across itself as well. You can also add a point to the path where there is none by double-clicking on the spot in the path with the node tool selected. Next, we're going to discuss a path's fill and stroke. If you look under Object in the software toolbar and select Fill and Stroke, it opens up a tab on the far right which controls the fill and stroke settings. Fill describes what an object is filled with. In this case, this object is filled with the color yellow. Under the Fill tab, we can see that solid flat color has been selected, and yellow has been chosen from the color sliders for this fill. You can alter the color here, including changing its saturation. Another way you can quickly select a fill color for an object is by making sure the object is selected and then choosing a color swatch from the lower toolbar. The other side of the coin is stroke. Stroke creates a line along the designated path. Considering an object with the stroke turned on to be a solid flat color, we can imagine the stroke to be outlining the object. When designing files for the Xtool laser cutter, stroke lines are most often used as the cut lines. With the Janome digital embroidery machine, including stroke lines allows you to select a different type of stitch called a running stitch. To make changes to the stroke line, including the width and the pattern, you can open up the third tab called Stroke Style. If you turn off the fill and stroke of an object, it will appear invisible, though the path is still there. On any object, you can use both fill and stroke together, one and not the other, or neither, and you can change the fill and stroke at any time. Next, we'll discuss grouping. Let's say we create a design that we want to group together and move as one cohesive element. To create a group, we should select all the objects we intend to group together by clicking and dragging a box over the whole thing, or by holding Shift and selecting the objects one at a time. When you use the drag box method in Inkscape, selection will only happen if you covered the entire shape. You'll see that no selection is happening here when I'm partially covering the shape with the selection box. But the selection does happen when I go all the way across. You can also add to or remove from the selection by holding Shift on the keyboard and clicking on your next objects. Let's group these three shapes and leave the text on its own. Once the objects are selected, we can create a group by going to the Inkscape toolbar and navigating to Object, Group. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Command-G or Control-G for PC users. Deselecting from this group now, if we click and drag it, you can see that it moves as one object. If we investigate its properties in our Fill and Stroke tab, it says it's undefined. And that's because the selection is of the whole group, each shape having its own different properties. If we want to make changes to pieces of it, we can ungroup it, or if you double-click on the group, we can modify each component without ungrouping. Another cool thing about grouping too is that you can have multiple levels of grouping at the same time. Each group is retained within the larger group, so when you ungroup, it will only ungroup the outmost group. Inner groups retained. Now we will talk about using different path tools to create interesting and useful shape combinations. These tools will not work correctly on grouped objects, so make sure to ungroup before applying these. The first one I want to talk about is union. The purpose of union is to join together whichever objects you have selected into one big object. For example, if we want to join together these two shapes, we would select both by using the Shift key and clicking on both pieces. Then we can go to the Inkscape toolbar under Path and to Union. You'll see they'll all turn the same color as they join because now they are one object with one set of properties. If we undo that union, we can also demonstrate the next tool called Difference. Difference will take a chunk out of whichever of the two objects is underneath. You can visualize it as working kind of like an eraser, or maybe like the upper shape is taking a bite out of the lower shape. In order for the Difference tool to work correctly, both shapes must have a fill, and the one acting as the bite should be on top relative to the other shape. Next is Intersection. Intersection is going to create a new object out of wherever the two selected shapes overlap, removing the original shapes to do so. You can also use exclusion, though I tend to use it less. It is the practical opposite of intersection, as it joins the two objects together, kind of like union, but it excludes any areas where those two shapes overlapped. By using different combinations of these path tools, we can create a bunch of increasingly complex and interfitted shapes. For example, we can copy this word guelph so that when it gets used up by the Difference tool, we can paste it back in place. If we select the text and the red shape, then we select Difference, the text will create a text-shaped hole in the red shape. Then, once we deselect, we can select Paste in Place from the drop-down in the Edit tab of the Inkscape menu. And the text will return, pasted right into the hole that was created. Learning how to create files without overlaps is critical for the proper execution of these files on the laser, Cricut, or embroidery machine. It's a tricky thing to wrap your head around, but it's a very useful habit. Next, if we want to make a hole for the text and the red shape in the brown shape, we will have to select the text and the red shape together. Duplicate them using Command D or Control D on a PC, or using the Edit tab of the Inkscape toolbar. You can see that we have 2 copies of it now, and I find it a little bit difficult to keep track of which is which. So while my duplicate is still selected, I like to change the color to something else by selecting a color from the menu below. Before applying difference to take a bite out of this brown shape, we have to use union to join these 2 parts together, because difference will only work between 2 selected objects, not more. I'm going to quickly touch on some other path tools that you might find helpful. I've already showed you the paste in place option, which is extremely helpful. Another tool which can be found under the Edit tab of the Inkscape toolbar is Select Same. It will select all of the objects within the design that share the same specs as the object you currently have selected. This can be really helpful for gathering up a lot of little components to join them in union or to move them in unison. You can select by the same fill, stroke, or object type. Next is the Align and Distribute tool. If we have selected multiple or even many objects, this tool will allow us to align them or distribute them relative to each other. It can be found at the very bottom of the Object tab in the Inkscape toolbar. Once selected, it will open up a tab on the right for us to select our parameters with. You can see from this drop-down list what the objects will move relative to. I most often leave it on last selected. Let's start with Align. Below, we can see the different specs that we have to align for. The ones I use most often are on the central vertical axis and on the central horizontal axis, in order to get an object right in the center of another. You can also align on the lower or upper edges or left and right. Distribution will space objects out based on the interval you choose. I usually select with even spaces between centers or with even gaps. Consider grouping objects too if you think you will want them to move together in the future. Next, we will talk about online resources. Because Inkscape is an open source free program, you can find innumerable tutorials on YouTube explaining each of these tools in more depth. I recommend expanding your knowledge by doing more research on the areas that interest you or will be most useful to you. The goal of this tutorial is to introduce you to the most applicable tools and workflows at a glance. You can find lots of helpful step-by-step work-along guides that can help you build your confidence in any of the tools we have looked at today and more. This one here is the tutorial playlist I use to learn much of what I know about Inkscape. I will link it in the description, but there are plenty of fantastic ones out there. We will also talk about searching for elements to include in a custom design by searching Google Images. Normally, when you enter a search term into Google Images, you'll get a whole bunch of different renderings, photos, illustrations, clip art, and more. However, the images that translate most neatly into a vector format are high contrast designs on a single tone background. So when I'm searching, I like to add the search term SVG. Adding the search term SVG won't give you files that are already in an SVG format necessarily, but it tends to result in a more curated selection of these high contrast, easily traceable images to choose from. One thing to keep in mind when borrowing elements to incorporate into your own project is plagiarism and copyright. Our Makerspace does not monitor for the use of copyrighted images. However, there can be significant consequences for using copyrighted works in a commercial setting. If you are producing promotional products for the Idea Hub, a school assignment, or a small business, you are expected to responsibly source or commission your own assets. We can play it safe by using images that are listed under Creative Commons license or are otherwise in the public domain. We can narrow down the Google image search by selecting Tools, Usage Rights, and Creative Commons license. This filter will give you a bunch of options that are likely to exist in the public domain, so you can use any of these files without as much worry about infringing on someone else's work. I like this griffin the best out of the options here. We'll copy and paste it into Inkscape, but you can also download the image and import it. When looking at this image, it's easy to tell that it's a PNG. You can see the pixels. But what we're going to do is use a tool called Trace Bitmap to take a part of this image based on how light or dark it is and automatically create it into a copy in a vector form. You can find the Trace Bitmap tool about halfway down the right-click menu once an object is selected. When you click Trace Bitmap, it's going to open up this menu on the right side that shows us a little preview of our design, and it also gives us control over the threshold, which is what the program sees and wants to convert. If we take this threshold all the way to the left, it sees nothing, and if we go all the way to the right, it sees everything. Most of the time, we are trying to scrub somewhere in between for that perfect contrast point to capture all the details that we want. This is why we made an effort to find a high contrast image with a single tone background. The Trace tool has a much easier time with those types of images. These sliders in the Trace menu can also change how smooth the corners are and how optimized the shape is. But I find the default setting does a pretty good job most of the time, and generally I only play around with the threshold. When we're happy with how the preview looks here, we can press Apply to see our vectorized version. It sits on top of the original until we drag it to the side. The one on the right is the one that's still made of pixels, and the one on the left is our vectorized version. We can tell because when we click on the node tool and inspect these two, we can see all the points in our vectored version, comparing to the original where no nodes are present. We can use a combination of the tools that we spoke about in order to create alterations to this design. Let's say that we wanted to make a cutout of this design using the laser cutter. We can create a border around this shape using a stroke line. Once we duplicate our griffin shape, we can use a tool under the Path tab of the Inkscape menu called Break Apart. This tool busts out all of those little inner shapes inside our more complex one, and it selects them all at the same time. Before we deselect, we're going to use Union to join all those little bits into one big silhouette shape of our griffin. I like to work using distinct colors that are easy to see, so let's make this into a stroke line and make it a nice bright color like red. The laser cutter and the Cricut will also separate the different steps that we are asking them to perform by the different colors labeling the original parts of the file. So in this case, the red line is where we could specify the laser to cut, while the black area is where we could define it as engraving. If we want the line to come out a little further from the griffin, but to retain the shape, we're going to use a tool called Outset. It can be found under the Object tab of the Inkscape menu. Down here you can see Inset and its opposite, Outset. Apply Outset as many times as you need until you're satisfied with how far away the stroke line is from the design. Next, we can add some additional details to our design. If we wanted to color in this griffin for a multicolor iron-on vinyl using the Cricut, we need to fill these empty spaces within the griffin with their own colored shapes. First, select the griffin using the node tool. Then what we want to do is select just the nodes on the inside. Then we're going to copy and paste those into their own shape. The easiest way to do that is by selecting one single node from the inside path. Then, using Command A or Control A on a PC, it will select all the nodes within that path. You can see that we got most of the inside of the body with that one selection, but I noticed that there's little details inside that we don't want to lose, such as the eye and the feathers. So I'm going to hold Shift to continue adding to the selection. Click on one node in the eye, one in the cheek, one in each leg, and then use Command A again to add to the selection, checking that the nodes are now shown in blue as selected. Now that it looks like we have this inner area fully selected, we're going to copy it. We will then deselect from the griffin shape, so no shape is selected. Then we will pull our paste in place move one more time, and we can see our new shape land in that open spot. We will want to change the color so we can see it more easily. I will show you again how we can use throwaway shapes and the path tools to break up an object into two. If I want to put a colored beak onto this griffin, I can use an orange circle. I will overlap the orange circle over the brown where I would like the beak to be. I select both shapes and use intersection, leaving me with only the piece for the beak. If I then copy this shape and undo back to when I had both shapes, I can select both again and choose difference this time to create a perfect slot for that beak shape. We can then paste in place the beak and change it to a preferred color. You can also use this method while incorporating the pen tool to create customized complex shapes. With the pen tool selected, if you click, 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 it will sort of create these connect the dot straight lines in between each point. If you click and hold while you're creating a point, it should create a curved line. It doesn't matter if it's super neat right away as you lay it down, because you can always go back in with the node tool and perfect it. So now we can use our custom shape in the way that we just used our circle. First, we select both shapes and use intersection. Copy the result of that and go back. Select both shapes again and use difference. Then paste in place and paste in the missing chunk. Finally, I will show you how to save and export your design. From File in the Inkscape toolbar, choose Export. This will open up a window on the right which will prompt us to verify the export quality and the file type. It will open a Finder window where we can specify where to save it to and in what format. You'll see there is an option of plain SVG or Inkscape SVG. In most situations, it will not matter which one you choose. But for the embroidery software Artistic Digitizer, it does have a preference for plain SVGs when rendering embroideries. From Export, you can also choose to convert your vector into a PNG or a JPEG. That wraps up our brief introduction of Inkscape and its uses in the Makerspace. I would encourage you to practice using these tools on your own project files and potentially to download Inkscape onto your own device. Also, as a reminder, we have broken this video down into chapters and posted the timestamps in the description. Please feel welcome to revisit parts of this video as needed. And remember that our Makerspace staff are a great resource when it comes to problem solving or just getting feedback. Please feel comfortable to ask questions or request assistance if you are unsure. Thanks for watching through this tutorial alongside us. You can check out the Wood Center YouTube channel for more equipment tutorials and sneak peeks of events and programs we have going on during the year.